She was 22 and penniless. No family left to take her in, no roof of her own, just a small wooden cheese harp worn warm by 4 generations of women's hands, a single thumbed page from her Bestemor's aging book sewn into the lining of her coat pocket, and 4 single-dollar bills she had earned washing milk pails at a small dairy outside Westby. And with that $4, she bought a half-buried limestone cheese cave dug straight into the side of a wooded coulee 3 miles up Coon Valley Road in the small Norwegian settlement of Halverson's Coulee in Vernon County, Wisconsin, in a stretch of the driftless area that had not heard a wooden cheese paddle scrape the inside of a copper kettle since the autumn of 1966. The hand-cut oak door had warped on its iron hinges. The path to it was lost under 58 autumns of fallen oak and maple leaves. But what nobody knew, least of all Sigrid Halverson herself, was that aging on the cedar shelves inside that cold, dim cave, sealed in beeswax and wrapped in clean linen, was something her Bestemor and her Bestemor's Bestemor had set down there across 162 years that would change her life forever. Before we go on, if you love stories like these, take a moment and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from tonight. We love to see how far these stories travel. She had seen the cave on a hand-printed card thumbtacked to the bulletin board of the small Vernon County Co-op in Westby in soft pencil. Limestone cheese cave, half-acre, coulee frontage, $4 or best offer, see Mr. Newt Sorensen at the courthouse. She had $6.80 folded in the inside pocket of her flannel workshirt, the last of 3 weeks of dairy wages. She walked the half-mile down to the small Vernon County courthouse on a cool Tuesday morning in early October, with the sugar maples just beginning to flame red along the coulee ridges, and she asked the woman at the front desk for Mr. Newt Sorensen by name. Mr. Newt Sorensen was 79 years old and had been the deputy clerk of Vernon County for 52 of those years. He looked up at her over the long oak counter when she said her name, looked at her over the top of his bifocals, and went very still. "Halverson," he said slowly, "the coulee in the word. From Halverson's Coulee. You'd be Astrid's granddaughter then." Sigrid nodded once. He folded his bifocals and walked back into a small storeroom without another word. He came back 2 minutes later with a heavy iron key on a piece of plain hemp twine, the iron warm from being held in a drawer for a long time. $4, he said. "We have been keeping this key 58 years. Your Bestemor left it with my father back in 1966, and she told him plain, hand this to whichever Halverson girl walks back up Coon Valley asking after the wheels. We had begun to wonder if any of you would." He laid the key in her palm. She paid him 4 soft paper dollars, signed her name, and he walked her to the door and set his old hand for 1 second on her shoulder, and he said, very softly, "You go on up there before sundown, hun. The cave has been waiting on you a long while." She had grown up with the smell of warm milk and cedar shelves, with the deep warm grass smell of fresh evening milk coming up from a copper kettle on a wood stove, with the dry, sharp smell of rennet being measured drop by drop into the kettle, with the cool, clean smell of pressed curd being cut by a wooden cheese harp into squares the size of a thumbnail, with the warm yellow smell of fresh butter being churned on a Saturday morning, with the deep amber smell of beeswax being melted in a small iron pot for sealing wheels, and with the dim, cool smell of the cheese cave itself, breathing slow out of the coulee on a hot August afternoon, dry and old and full of years. She had grown up sitting on a low cedar stool at her Bestemor's kitchen table when she was 3 and 4 years old, watching her Bestemor's long red-knuckled hands draw the wooden cheese harp, slow through a kettle of fresh-set curd, judging the cut by feel and by sound, with a slow patience that did not look like work, but like listening. Her Bestemor was Astrid Halverson, born in 1940 in the same small white-clapboard farmhouse at the head of Halverson's Coulee, where Sigrid would later be born, the only daughter of Lars and Inga Halverson. She had learned the wheels at the side of her own mother, on the same copper kettle and the same wooden cheese harp her great-grandmother had carried out of Telemark in 1862. Astrid was tall and thin, with the long red-knuckled hands of a Coulee dairywoman, her white hair worn in a single tight braid pinned at the back of her neck. Sigrid had called her Bestemor from the first day she could shape the sound. Sigrid's mother, Liv, had gone to Minneapolis when Sigrid was 3 and had not come back, and Sigrid's father, Bjorn, had been killed in a tractor accident in the lower coulee when she was 9, so the years had belonged to Bestemor from the time Sigrid could carry a tin pail without spilling. She learned to tell evening milk from morning milk by the smell of the cream before she could read. By 8, she could draw a wooden cheese harp through a set kettle of curd in a single slow even pass without breaking a single square. By 12, she could read a wheel. She could stand at her Bestemor's elbow at the long cedar shelves of the cave and see, before her Bestemor told her, whether a wheel had 2 more months or 6, whether the rind was forming clean or whether the beeswax seal had cracked and the wheel was going off, whether the cool dim of the cave was holding the wheel at the steady 53 degrees the cave had always held, or whether the autumn warmth had drifted in too long and the wheel would have to be moved deeper. By 18, she had pressed her own wheels for 4 full seasons, sealed 61 finished wheels in beeswax in her own hand, and learned every one of the 17 telemark line aging signs Bestemor said a Halverson woman had to know before she was allowed to seal a wheel under her own initials. Bestemor, on a cool Saturday morning in October in Sigrid's 18th year, walked out of the small white-clapboard farmhouse with a single fresh-pressed wheel of pull-tossed, wrapped in clean linen, and laid it in Sigrid's hands at the kitchen door, and said, "You are a Halverson woman now, child. The milk knows you. The harp knows you. The cave knows you." And then she said, in her quiet way, "And there's one thing your Bestemor has not yet shown you, because the cave herself had to choose the morning. Come up the coulee with me." But before Sigrid or Astrid, there had been Solveig. Solveig Halverson had come down off a ship at the port of Quebec City in the autumn of 1862, 21 years old, with her young husband Ole Halverson, a small wooden trunk holding everything they owned, and a single cedar box of dried Brunost starter culture, and a small leather pouch of saved rennet from her own mother's dairy in the high mountain valley of Telemark in Norway that her grandmother had been keeping alive since 1839. The Halversons had walked west across the Great Lakes country and down into the Wisconsin driftless in the summer of 1863, and they had stopped at a deep wooded coulee in northern Vernon County because the slope of the coulee ran clean and steep, and a small clear branch came down off a limestone bluff at the head of it the way the streams came down off the high pastures of Telemark. And Solveig had stood at the foot of the bluff with the cedar box of starter at her feet, and she had pressed her hand against the cold cream limestone of the bluff, and she had said, in the slow, careful English she was still learning, "This is the place. The cave is here. We will not go further." She had been 21. She had no money to speak of, and no kettle and no cave, and no one in Vernon County who believed a young Norwegian immigrant woman could keep alive a starter culture older than the state of Wisconsin. But Solveig had set her hand on the cold limestone of the bluff, and she had begun. She and Ole dug into the bluff with hand tools through the autumn of 1863, hauling out the soft cream limestone bucket by bucket, and they shaped the cave 12 feet deep and 10 feet wide and tall enough to stand, and they built 4 long cedar shelves into the cave walls in the spring of 1864, and they hung a hand-cut oak door on hand-forged iron strap hinges at the cave mouth in the summer of that same year. Solveig pressed her first wheel of pull-tossed in the cave in the autumn of 1864. She kept the cave for 48 years. She trained her granddaughter Inga at her side, and Inga trained her daughter Astrid, and the cheese cave at Halverson's Coulee held its wheels without a single empty season for 103 years through Solveig and Inga and Astrid, until the autumn of 1966 when Astrid was 26 and her own mother Inga had just gone, and Astrid closed the heavy oak door of the cave on a cool October evening and walked back down to the white-clapboard farmhouse and did not open the cave again for 58 years. Bestemor had 3 rules for the wheels. The first was this: the milk is the teacher. You do not make the cheese, child. The milk and the rennet and the cave make the cheese, and you only stand beside the kettle and the shelves, and you read what the milk is telling you, and you do what it is asking. A cheesemaker who thinks she decides what the wheel will become is a cheesemaker who will lose 2 wheels out of every 5 in the cave, because the milk will turn against her on the kettle and the rind will crack on her in the cave. The second was this: the cave is the keeper. The cold dry of the cave at a steady 53 degrees year-round is what ages a wheel slow and true, not us. We seal the wheel in beeswax, and we wrap it in clean linen, and we set it on the cedar shelf, and we mind the door, and we mind the air, and the cave does the rest. A woman who thinks she ages a wheel is a woman who is fooling herself. The cave ages the wheel. The third was this: the starter is the family. The cedar box of Brunost starter culture your great-great-grandmother carried out of Telemark in 1862 has been alive in this kitchen and this cave for 162 years, never once gone cold, never once gone sour, never once allowed to die in a careless winter. We feed it warm whole milk 3 times a week. We keep it on a cool corner of the back of the wood stove. We never let it grow more than it can use. And when a Halverson woman is gone, the next Halverson woman feeds it the same morning, with her own hand, in the same small earthen crock. Mind the starter above the other 2, daughter. The wheels can be remade, the cave can be repaired, the starter cannot be replaced. Bestemor died in November of 2023, on a cold, rainy afternoon, in her chair beside the wood stove in the small, white-clapboard farmhouse at the head of Halverson's coulee, with the open-thumbed aging book in her lap and the small earthen crock of warm Brunost starter on the side table beside her. The doctor said it was her heart. Sigrid was 21. She did not cry. She came home from her shift at the dairy outside Westby and found Bestemor in the chair, and she sat down on the floor beside the chair and laid her cheek against Bestemor's cool hand, and she stayed there until the funeral home came. She fed the starter herself that night, with a small ladle of warm whole milk in her own careful young hand, and only when the crock was set back on the cool corner of the wood stove did she sit down beside the cold wood stove and finally let herself cry. The small white-clapboard farmhouse at the head of Halverson's coulee belonged to the bank, because Bestemor had taken a small second mortgage on it during her last sickness, and within 4 months of Bestemor's funeral, the bank had come and asked Sigrid to be out by the 1st of October. She had left with the small wooden cheese harp Bestemor had pressed into her hand on her last clear afternoon. A single thumbed page torn carefully from Bestemor's aging book sewn into the lining of her coat pocket, the small earthen crock of warm Brunost starter wrapped in 2 clean dish towels and a wool sweater, a small canvas bag of her clothes, and the photograph of 3 women standing at the open oak door of the cheese cave in 1948. If these stories are reaching you tonight, take a second to subscribe. It truly does help us keep making them. And tell us in the comments, was there ever a small living thing in your family that someone kept warm and fed for years on end? A starter, a sourdough, a tended fire that you carry with you from a woman who is no longer here. The 3-mile walk up Coon Valley Road from where the borrowed pickup would no longer make the muddy ruts of the coulee road was steeper than she remembered. The sugar maples were flaming red along the ridges, the bur oaks were going deep gold in the bottom. A clear, cold branch came down off the limestone bluff at the head of the coulee, the water bright over rounded fieldstones. She found the foundation of the small white clapboard farmhouse first, 4 courses of fieldstone and a square of new grass, and just beyond the foundation, set against the foot of the moss-covered cream limestone bluff that rose into oak hickory woods, the hand-cut oak door of the cheese cave. The oak planks were silvered and split and warped on iron strap hinges, rusted dark, the limestone framing the door patched green and silver with moss and lichen. 58 autumns of fallen oak and maple leaves banked deep against the threshold. She did not cry. She brushed the deep bank of leaves away from the threshold with her boot, fitted the heavy iron key into the rusted iron lock plate, worked the key gently for the better part of 2 minutes until the wards remembered how to turn, and then the bolt slid back with a small dry sound, and the warped oak door eased open on its iron hinges with the slow groan of a door that has held for 160 years. The cool, dim breath of the cave came out to meet her, 53 degrees, and dry and smelling of beeswax and aged linen, and the faint, warm, sweet ghost of 162 years of slow wheels. She stood in the doorway a long minute. Then she lit her Bestemor's small brass kerosene lantern, and she stepped inside. The cave was 12 feet deep and 10 feet wide, and tall enough for her to stand, the natural cream limestone walls cool and dry and patched with moss only at the cave mouth, the deeper walls bare and pale. 4 long cedar shelves ran along the natural walls at chest height, hand-built by Solveig in 1864, the cedar gone dark amber with age but uncracked. On the shelves stood the wheels, dozens of them, some squat round wheels of pull-tossed sealed in deep gold beeswax, some tall narrow wheels of neukelost stippled with whole caraway seed, some small dark brown blocks of getost, the whey cheese the Halverson women had cooked down from their goat's milk every autumn for 6 generations. All of them sealed in beeswax, all of them wrapped in clean linen, all of them dated in her great-great-grandmother's hand or her great-grandmother's or her grandmother's, the small slips of waxed paper tied to the linen with hemp twine. The lantern light caught the rows of beeswax-sealed wheels and threw warm amber back off them in soft, shifting shadow. The dim, cool air of the cave settled in around her. She walked slowly down the center of the cave, the lantern held up, and she read the slips as she passed. Pultost, Solveig, 1864. Pultost, Solveig, 1867. Pultost, Solveig, 1872. Neukelost, Solveig, 1875, the year she first grew her own caraway in the south garden. Gietost, Solveig, 1879. Pultost, Inga, 1901. Neukelost, Inga, 1904. Gietost, Inga, 1909. Pultost, Astrid, 1948, her first wheel under her own initials. Pultost Astrid, 1966, the last wheel Bestemor had sealed in beeswax before she had walked away from the cave. The slow telemark-line cheese-keeping of 3 generations of women, alive on the cedar shelves of the limestone bluff for 160 years. On the back wall, on the deepest cedar shelf, sat a small flat tin box with a hinged lid and a small canvas sack. Sigrid lifted the tin first. Inside was the original aging book, thick, sewn together with linen thread, the cover of soft-tanned cowhide, the pages of cotton paper hand-cut and hand-ruled, and on every page, in the careful old hands of 3 generations of Halverson women, was the whole record of the cave. The wheel, the year, the starter feeding date, the kettle temperature, the cut of the harp, the press weight, the cave shelf, the aging months, the break-open date, the flavor noted. Page after page after page, 160 years of careful Norwegian cheese-keeping. Inside the canvas sack lay 16 small American gold coins, $5 pieces from the 1860s and 70s, the gold Solveig had carried out of Telemark in the lining of her own coat. And folded into the back of the aging book, sealed with a drop of warm dark beeswax gone hard as amber, was a single letter, the wax still whole, addressed in long, careful old Norwegian-tinged penmanship. To whoever opens this door. From Solveig Halverson, Ostefru, Halverson's coolie, 1865. She broke the wax seal with her thumb and read the letter aloud to the cave, because there was no one else to read it to, and the slow dim wheels were the only thing listening. To whoever opens this door. If you are reading this, you have walked up Coon Valley with a key in your hand, and you have brushed the leaves from the threshold, and you have lit a lantern in the dim, and you have known to read the slips on the wheels, and you are a Halverson woman, and the cave has called you home. My name is Solveig Halverson. I was born Solveig Aas in the high mountain valley of Telemark in Norway in the spring of 1841, the eldest of 3 sisters, and the only one my mother taught the wheels, because I was the only one who would sit still long enough to learn to listen to the milk. I came across the ocean with my husband Ole in the autumn of 1862, with a small cedar box of dried Brunest starter culture my own mother had been feeding warm whole milk every other day since 1839, and I walked west across the Great Lakes and down into the Wisconsin Driftless in the summer of 1863, and I came into this deep wooded coulee in northern Vernon County, and I stood at the foot of the cream limestone bluff, and I pressed my hand against the cold stone, and I knew, the way a woman knows a thing once and keeps it for 50 years, that the cave was here. I dug this cave with my own 2 hands in Oles across the autumn of 1863, and I pressed my first wheel of pull-tossed on the back cedar shelf in the autumn of 1864. The wheels on these shelves, daughter, are not money. They are not gold. They are better than money, because money buys a season, and a sealed wheel of true telemark line pull-tossed in beeswax in a cold, dry limestone cave feeds a family for years. The starter in the small earthen crock by your kitchen stove, daughter, is the inheritance, and the cave is the inheritance, and the wheels in the cave are the inheritance. The gold in the sack is only the small grease that keeps the inheritance dry, and I trust you will not spend it for any reason other than to mend this oak door, or repair these cedar shelves, or buy fresh whole milk from a coolie neighbor. In a year the cows go dry. Do not let the starter die. Do not move the wheels. Do not be greedy with the cheese. Feed the starter warm whole milk 3 times a week, set on the cool corner of the back of the stove. Press your wheels slow and true, seal them in beeswax, lay them on the cedar shelves of the cave. And when a Halverson woman is gone, the next Halverson woman feeds the starter the same morning with her own hand, in the same small earthen crock. The starter is the family. With my whole hand and my whole heart, Solveig Halverson, Ostafru, Halverson's Coulee, Vernon County, Wisconsin, the 14th of October, 1865. Sigrid laid the letter flat on the deepest cedar shelf. She set her open palm across it. She did not cry. She closed her eyes and breathed in the cool beeswax and cedar smell of the cave and the faint, warm, sweet ghost of 162 years of slow wheels, and the tight thing that had lived in her chest since the cold November afternoon she had walked into her Bestemor's kitchen, loosened. The name of the loosening was home. She drove the gold pieces down to a careful coin dealer in La Crosse the following week, a man named Mr. Halvor Knudsen, who valued the 16 small $5 gold pieces at $37,600. She sold 5 of them. She put $12,000 in a savings account at the Vernon County Bank, and she walked back up Coon Valley with a fresh oak plank for the door, 2 coils of new iron hinge strap, a small cake of new beeswax for sealing wheels, a small can of new kerosene for Bestemor's lantern, and a half-gallon of fresh whole milk from a coolie neighbor for the starter. She did not move the wheels. The wheels stayed where Solveig and Inga and Astrid had set them, on the cool cedar shelves of the cave. But she did, that first November, walk down off the ridge with a single small slice of pull-tossed, wrapped in clean linen, to the older women of Halverson's Coulee and 3 coolies around it. Mrs. Sigrid Olsen, 88, who had been a child when Astrid pressed her first wheel. Mr. Halvor Pettersson, 84, whose father had bought from Inga in 1941. Each one took the small slice of pull-tossed in their old hands and looked at it for a long time. Each one said the same thing, in some form. We had begun to wonder if any of you would come back. And in the early spring, an older woman drove up the road from the University of Wisconsin Center for Dairy Research in Madison, who had been searching for 15 years for surviving genetic lines of pre-pasteurized telemark tradition starter culture, and she stood in the open door of the cave on a warm March afternoon with her hand against her mouth, looking at the rows of beeswax-sealed wheels under the lantern amber, and she said only, "Please, Han, please let me come back with the lab. That is the thing about the cheese-keeping our grandmothers teach us, the slow kind, the kind we learn at a kitchen table beside a small earthen crock when we are 3 years old. It is not really about the wheel. The wheel is the wage. The starter is the trade. The trade is the small earthen crock kept warm on the back corner of a wood stove for 162 years, and the cold dry of a limestone cave at a steady 53 degrees, and the beeswax seal laid careful on a fresh-pressed wheel of pull-tossed on a cool October evening. The trade is the older women and men of 3 coolies who walk out to their porches in November holding a small slice of true telemark line pull-tossed in their old hands and weep quietly and say, "We had begun to wonder if any of you would come back." The trade is, above all, the truth Solveig wrote in her letter on the 14th of October, 1865. The starter is the family. The cave is the keeper. The wheels are the inheritance. We are only the next pair of hands. Sigrid Halverson was 22 years old and penniless. She had $4 to her name, and she spent them on a half-buried limestone cheese cave dug into the side of a wooded coulee 3 miles up Coon Valley Road in Halverson's Coulee in Vernon County, Wisconsin. It was the best $4 she ever spent. If this story has kept you company tonight, thank you for sitting up with us. Sleep well, breathe easy, and see you in the last warm light of the day.